Who battered your face? Cold Hell's Angel asks African MAID. What happens next will shock you. The autumn breeze rustled through the perfectly manicured hedges as Naya worked methodically, her movements careful and deliberate. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled weeds from the flower beds lining the expansive front yard of the Morrison family's estate. The muscles in her face ached when she winced, the fresh bruises hidden beneath a thin layer of makeup that was beginning to wear off in the afternoon sun. She kept her eyes down, focused on the task at hand. That's what she had learned to do over the past few months. Stay invisible, stay quiet, keep working. The less attention she drew to herself, the better. The sound of birds chirping in the maple trees offered a small comfort as she worked, their peaceful songs a stark contrast to the tension that filled her daily life. The sudden rumble of a motorcycle engine broke through her thoughts. Despite her instinct to keep her head down, something made her look up. A massive black Harley-Davidson pulled to a stop at the curb, its chrome pipes gleaming in the sunlight. The rider cut the engine, and the sudden silence felt heavy in the air. Nia's heart quickened as she watched the man dismount. He was tall and weathered, probably in his 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and a leather vest covered in patches. His face was lined with years of hard living, and a long scar ran down one side of his neck. Everything about him screamed danger, the kind of person her mother had always warned her to avoid. She quickly looked back down at the flower bed, her fingers working faster now, hoping he would pass by without notice. But his heavy boots stopped right at the edge of the lawn. She could feel his presence, like a shadow falling over her. Who battered your face? His voice was gruff but quiet, barely above a whisper. The words hit her like a physical blow. Naya's hands froze in the dirt, her breath catching in her throat. No one had asked before. Not the neighbors who surely must have noticed, not the grocery store clerk who rang up her purchases, not even the mail carrier who saw her almost every day. She forced herself to look up at him, meeting eyes that were surprisingly gentle despite his intimidating appearance. The question hung in the air between them, demanding an answer she wasn't prepared to give. I'm fine, she managed to say, her voice barely audible. It was just an accident. The lie felt bitter on her tongue, one she'd told herself too many times. Jack. She could see his name stitched on his vest now. Didn't move. He just stood there, his weathered face unreadable, but his eyes never leaving hers. There was something in that steady gaze that made her want to cry, to tell him everything. But fear kept her silent, fear of what would happen if she spoke the truth. After what felt like an eternity, he gave a slight nod and turned away. His boots crunched on the gravel as he walked back to his motorcycle. Nia remained frozen in place, her hands still buried in the soft earth, watching as he disappeared down the street. The sound of the motorcycle faded into the distance, but his question echoed in her mind. Who battered your face? 4 simple words that cracked something open inside her, something she had tried so hard to keep sealed away. She stared at the spot where he had stood, wondering why a stranger, a scary-looking biker of all people, would be the first to ask, the first to see past her careful facade. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Nia's hands trembled as she gripped the garden shears. The stranger's words kept repeating in her head. Who battered your face? No one had ever asked her that before. Not the grocery store clerk, not the mail carrier, not even Mrs. Thompson next door who always waved hello. The afternoon sun beat down on her back as she trimmed the rose bushes. Every snip of the shears made her jump. She kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see Marcus, her employer's son, watching from the window. The bruises on her arms ached, reminding her of his last outburst 3 days ago. A car door slammed somewhere down the street. Nia dropped the shears, her heart racing. It was just the neighbor getting home from work. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. But her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The roses needed water. Nia walked to the garage to get the watering can, her footsteps quick and light on the concrete. As she reached for the metal can, a shadow fell across the garage floor. She spun around, ready to apologize, to make herself small. It was the biker again. Jack. He stood in the garage doorway, his leather vest covered in patches, his gray beard neatly trimmed despite his rough appearance. "You forgot these," he said, holding out the garden shears she'd dropped. "Thank you," Nia whispered, reaching for them with trembling fingers. Jack didn't let go of the shears right away. His eyes, kind despite their weathered wrinkles, met hers. "Nobody deserves to be hit," he said quietly. The words broke something inside her. Tears welled up in her eyes before she could stop them. She tried to wipe them away, but they kept coming. "It's Marcus," she found herself saying. "Mr. Thompson's son. He gets angry. If I don't clean things right, if I'm too slow." She couldn't finish. Jack's face hardened, but his voice stayed gentle. "How long?" 6 months. Nia wrapped her arms around herself. "Since he moved back home. I can't leave. I need this job. My family back home depends on the money I send." Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He counted out several bills. "Here," he said, holding them out to her. "It's not much, but it's a start." Nia stared at the money, afraid to take it. "I can't." "You can," Jack cut her off. "And I'm gonna help you. But you gotta meet me halfway." He placed the money in her hand, closing her fingers around it. "Nobody owns you, understand?" A car engine rumbled in the distance. Nia quickly stuffed the money in her pocket as panic seized her chest. "Marcus will be home soon," she whispered. Jack nodded. "Take my number," he said, pulling a crumpled receipt from his wallet and scribbling on the back. "You need help, you call. Day or night." Nia took the paper, clutching it like a lifeline. For the first time in months, she felt something other than fear. A tiny spark of hope, fragile but real. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. Jack turned to leave but paused in the doorway. "Remember what I said. Nobody owns you." Nia watched him walk away, the paper with his number burning in her pocket like a secret flame. She didn't know if she could trust him, this stranger who'd noticed what everyone else ignored. But for the first time in 6 months, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of Nia's tiny room in the servants' quarters. She sat on her bed, staring at her phone. The text from Jack was simple. "I know some people who can help. No strings attached. Your choice." Her thumb hovered over the message. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a sickly yellow, but the pain inside hadn't dulled. Nia pulled her knees to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. The thought of accepting help from a stranger, a Hell's Angel no less, made her stomach twist. She jumped at the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Quickly hiding her phone under her pillow, Nia straightened her uniform and grabbed her cleaning supplies. The morning routine waited for no one. In the kitchen, Nia kept her head down as she scrubbed the marble countertops. The house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the dishwasher. Too quiet. She could feel eyes on her back before she heard Mrs. Patterson's voice. "Nia, a word, please." Nia's hands trembled as she set down the cleaning cloth. So, Patterson stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her sleeve. The woman's face was a mask of concern, but her eyes were cold. "Is everything all right? You've seemed distracted lately." Mrs. Patterson's voice was silk over steel. "And I couldn't help but notice you speaking with that unsavory character next door." Nia's throat went dry. "Just being polite, ma'am. He asked for directions." "Twice?" Mrs. Patterson raised an eyebrow. "Listen, dear. I know things haven't been easy, but we consider you part of the family. My son has expressed concern about your behavior as well." At the mention of her abuser, Nia's hands clenched. She forced them to relax, kept her face neutral. "Everything is fine, Mrs. Patterson. I'm very grateful for my position here." "Good." Mrs. Patterson's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Then I trust you'll be more careful about the company you keep. We wouldn't want anything to jeopardize your work visa, would we?" The Church's threat hung in the air like poison gas. Nia nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, ma'am." After Mrs. Patterson left, Nia leaned against the counter, her legs weak. The walls of the massive house seemed to close in around her. She thought of her family back home, of the money she sent them each month. She thought of the bruises hidden beneath her uniform, of the night spent crying silently into her pillow. During her lunch break, Nia slipped out to the garden. With shaking fingers, she typed a response to Jack. "Can we meet? Somewhere public?" His reply came quickly. "Jefferson Park, 3 p.m., near the fountain." At 3 o'clock, Nia sat on a bench by the park's central fountain. Children played nearby while parents chatted on blankets spread across the grass. The normality of the scene made her feel like an outsider looking in. Jack appeared, wearing a worn leather jacket despite the warm weather. He sat beside her, leaving space between them. Neither spoke for a moment, watching the water cascade down the fountain's tiers. "I can't stay long," Nia said softly, "but I need help. I'm scared." Jack nodded, his weathered face serious. "Fear keeps us trapped. Trust me, I know." He pulled out a business card and placed it on the bench between them. "This is a women's shelter. They have lawyers, people who understand your situation." Nia picked up the card, her fingers trembling. "If they find out?" "They won't," Jack said firmly. "Not unless you want them to." Taking a deep breath, Nia slipped the card into her pocket. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll call them." The park bench felt cold beneath Nia as she sat down, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her worn sweater. Jack settled beside her, keeping a respectful distance. His weathered face remained neutral, but his eyes held a gentle understanding that made it easier for her to speak. "I came here 2 years ago," Nia began, her voice barely above a whisper. "The family promised good pay, a visa, sponsorship, and—" She swallowed hard. "It was fine at first. Mrs. Harrison was kind, but then their son Matthew moved back home." Jack nodded slowly, his large hands resting on his knees. He didn't interrupt, didn't push. He just listened. "It started with small things," Nia continued, her shoulders hunching. "Cruel words, complaints about my work. Then he began threatening to tell his parents I was stealing." Her voice cracked. "Last month, he got angry because I didn't iron his shirt properly. That was the first time he hit me." A muscle twitched in Jack's jaw, but his voice remained steady. "And you can't leave because of the visa?" Nia wrapped her arms around herself. "If I lose this job, I'll be deported. My family back home." She shook her head. "They depend on the money I send. I can't fail them." "Listen carefully," Jack said, his gravelly voice gentle but firm. "What you're living through isn't your fault. And there are people who can help. Legal aid, women's, shelters, support groups. But the visa. There are special visas for people in your situation, Jack explained. I know because I've helped others before. You're not alone in this fight. Nia looked at him with surprise. You've helped others? A shadow crossed Jack's face. Let's just say I've spent enough time on the wrong side of things to know how to work the right side now. He shifted on the bench, facing her more directly. But Nia, getting away from Matthew, that's only part of the battle. She frowned. What do you mean? The harder fight is here, Jack tapped his chest. Getting back what he took from you. Your sense of worth, your belief in yourself, that's the real war we need to win. Tears welled in Nia's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. Jack pretended not to notice, giving her a moment to compose herself. I have a spare room, he said after a while. It's nothing fancy, but it's safe. If things get worse, if you ever feel you're in immediate danger, you come to me, day or night. No questions asked. Nia stared at him, overwhelmed by the offer. This gruff, intimidating man with his leather vest and motorcycle was offering her sanctuary. It seemed surreal. Why are you helping me? She asked quietly. Jack was silent for a long moment. Because someone should have helped me when I needed it. Sometimes the right thing comes from the most unexpected place. Nia nodded slowly, but uncertainty clouded her features. Thank you, but I don't know if I can... You don't have to decide now, Jack interrupted gently. Just know the offer stands. Here's my number. He handed her a folded piece of paper. If you need help, call. If you just need to talk, call. No pressure, no expectations. Nia took the paper, holding it like it was something precious. Thank you, she whispered again, but the fear and uncertainty still lingered in her eyes. The thought of taking such a huge step, of trusting this stranger completely, was overwhelming, despite his kindness. Jack understood her hesitation. He'd seen it before in others he'd tried to help. Sometimes the familiar pain felt safer than the unknown path to freedom. Nia's hands trembled as she folded her few belongings into a small duffel bag. The familiar floral wallpaper of her tiny room in the servants' quarters seemed to close in around her. Each creak of the old house made her heart jump, afraid someone might discover what she was planning. She carefully placed her mother's photo, wrapped in a soft cloth, between layers of clothing. The smiling face in the picture gave her strength, but doubt still gnawed at her insides. Was she making the right choice? Jack's offer of help felt like a lifeline, but she'd learned the hard way that nothing in life came free. What if I'm wrong about him? She whispered to herself, smoothing down a wrinkled shirt. The bruises on her arms had started to fade, but the memory of how she got them remained sharp and clear. The sound of voices from downstairs made her pause. She recognized the angry tone of her employer's son, Thomas, echoing up through the air vent. Nia crept closer to listen, her chest tight with anxiety. That nosy biker needs to mind his own business, Thomas's voice carried clearly. If that girl knows what's good for her, she'll keep her mouth shut. One word from us to immigration, and she's done. Keep your voice down, another voice hissed, his mother. The neighbors will hear. I don't care who hears. She's our employee. We own her time, her work. If she thinks she can just walk away... Thomas's voice grew louder, more menacing. I'll make sure she never works in this country again. No one will believe her over us anyway. Nia's legs felt weak. She steadied herself against the wall, her fingernails digging into her palms. The threats weren't new, but hearing them spoken so coldly made them feel more real than ever. Heavy footsteps stomped up the stairs. Nia quickly moved away from the vent, her heart pounding. She could hear Thomas pacing in the hallway, his shoes clicking against the hardwood floors. Something inside her snapped. The fear that had kept her quiet for so long transformed into a burning anger. Without thinking, she marched to her door and yanked it open. Thomas stood there, his face red with rage. "You can't keep threatening me," Naya said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'm not your property." Thomas's eyes narrowed dangerously. He took a step toward her, fists clenched. "You ungrateful." "Step back." The gravelly voice cut through the tension like a knife. Jack stood at the top of the stairs, his weathered face hard as stone. He must have been making a delivery next door, and heard the commotion. "This is private property," Thomas snarled, turning to face Jack. "You're trespassing." "And you're about to make the biggest mistake of your life," Jack replied calmly, but his eyes held a warning. He looked at Nia. "This isn't the way, kid. Not here, not now." Naya's anger deflated, replaced by cold reality. She'd let her emotions push her into a dangerous corner. Jack was right. Confronting Thomas alone was foolish. She could see it in the way Thomas stood, in the cruel twist of his mouth. This man was capable of anything. "Go back in your room," Jack said softly to Nia. "We'll handle this the right way." Thomas stepped between them. "Handle what? There's nothing to handle. She works for us. End of story." Nia backed away, her earlier courage turning to ashes in her mouth. She watched Jack and Thomas square off in the hallway, two immovable forces. She knew this moment would change everything, but she hadn't wanted it to happen like this. The community center's fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as Nia followed Jack through the pale green hallway. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and she kept close to the wall, as if trying to disappear into it. Jack's heavy boots echoed against the linoleum floor. "You don't have to say anything," Jack said in his gruff voice. "Just listen." Nia nodded, her throat too tight to speak. When they reached room 104, Jack held the door open for her. Inside, plastic chairs were arranged in a circle. Some people were already seated, while others stood by a small table with coffee and cookies, chatting quietly. The group was diverse, young and old, different races and backgrounds. Some looked confident, others seemed as nervous as Nia felt. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes noticed them and walked over. "Jack, good to see you," she said warmly. Then she turned to Nia. "Welcome. I'm Sarah, the group facilitator. Would you like some coffee?" Nia shook her head, managing a small smile. Jack guided her to two empty chairs, and they sat down. As more people filtered in, the circle filled up. Nia counted 12 others besides herself and Jack. Sarah started the meeting by asking if anyone wanted to share. A young woman named Mariah spoke first, describing how she'd finally left her abusive boyfriend after 5 years. Her voice shook at times, but her eyes showed determination. "The hardest part wasn't leaving," Maria said. "It was believing I deserved better." Nia's hands tightened in her lap. Those words hit close to home. An older man shared next, talking about overcoming alcoholism and anger issues that had nearly destroyed his family. Then a woman in her 40s described escaping domestic violence with her children. As each person spoke, Nia felt something shift inside her. These weren't just sad stories. They were stories of survival, of people who had faced their fears and chosen to change their lives. Jack sat quietly beside her, a steady presence. He didn't share, but Nia noticed how the others greeted him with respect and familiarity. She wondered how long he'd been coming here. Near the end of the meeting, Sarah asked if anyone else wanted to speak. Nia's heart pounded. Before she could stop herself, she raised her hand slightly. Her voice, came out barely above a whisper. The group waited patiently. Jack gave her a small nod of encouragement. "I work as a maid," she continued, stronger now. "My employer's son?" She touched her face where the bruises were fading. "I'm scared all the time. But sitting here, listening to all of you, I don't want to be afraid anymore." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. "Thank you for sharing," Sarah said gently. "You're very brave to be here." Others nodded in agreement. A woman across the circle reached out and squeezed Nia's hand briefly. After the meeting ended, Nia stood in the parking lot with Jack, watching cars drive away into the evening darkness. The stories she'd heard played over and over in her mind. She saw herself in those stories, the fear, the shame, the desire for change. "What do you think?" Jack asked. Nia wrapped her arms around herself, feeling both stronger and more uncertain than ever. "They made it sound possible," she said softly. "Starting over, but—" She looked down at her worn shoes. "I don't know if I can be that brave." Jack leaned against his motorcycle, waiting for her to continue. "What if I try and fail?" she whispered. "What if things get worse?" The morning sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn as Nia pulled weeds from the flower beds. Her hands trembled slightly, remembering the cold stare her employer had given her at breakfast. The woman hadn't said a word, but her eyes had spoken volumes. She knew something was different about Nia lately. "You missed a spot," came the sharp voice from behind her. Nia's shoulders tensed as Mrs. Davidson approached, pointing at an imaginary flaw in Nia's work. "And the windows need washing again. They're streaky." Nia nodded, keeping her eyes down. "Yes, ma'am. I'll do them right away." The front door slammed, and Nia let out a shaky breath. Her stomach churned as she thought about Jack's words from the support group meeting. "Sometimes staying feels safer than leaving, but it's a trap that'll slowly kill your spirit." As if summoned by her thoughts, she heard the familiar rumble of a motorcycle. Jack pulled up to his driveway next door, his leather vest catching the morning light. He gave her a small nod, then disappeared into his garage. Later that afternoon, while taking out the trash, Nia found herself walking toward Jack's house. He was working on his bike, his weathered hands covered in grease. "Sit down," he said without looking up, gesturing to an old lawn chair. Nia sank into the chair, wringing her hands. "They're watching me closer now, making up reasons to criticize everything I do." Jack wiped his hands on a rag, and finally turned to face her. His eyes were distant, like he was seeing something far away. "You remind me of someone I knew in Vietnam," he said quietly. "Young kid, barely 18. Kept following orders even when he knew they were wrong. Kept trying to please people who didn't care if he lived or died." He pulled up another chair and sat heavily. "That kid was me. Took me years to learn that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away." Nia watched as Jack rolled up his sleeve, revealing a faded scar that ran the length of his forearm. "Got this trying to save my buddy during an ambush. When I came home, I was so angry, so lost. Joined the Hells Angels thinking I'd found a new family. Instead, I just found more ways to hurt myself." His voice grew softer. "But one day I woke up in a hospital after a bad accident. Nurse there, she looked at me like I was worth saving. That's when I realized I had to make a choice, keep destroying myself or find the courage to change." Nia felt tears welling up in her eyes. "How did you do it? How did you start over?" "One day at a time," Jack answered, his gruff voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Found people who believed in me, learned to believe in myself. He paused, looking directly at her. Just like you're doing now. Naya stood up suddenly, her heart pounding but her mind clear for the first time in months. I can't go back in there, she whispered. I won't. Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. You don't have to. With trembling fingers, Naya pulled out her phone and typed out a simple message to Mrs. Davidson. I quit. Her thumb hovered over the send button for just a moment before pressing it firmly. The response was immediate. Her phone began buzzing with angry messages, but Naya turned it off. She felt lighter, despite the uncertainty ahead. Jack remained silent beside her, but his presence was steady and reassuring, like an anchor in a storm. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn as Naya stood in her tiny room, carefully folding her few possessions into a worn duffel bag. Her hands trembled as she packed, but her movements were determined. Through the window she could see Jack's motorcycle, parked at the curb, its chrome gleaming in the early light. He sat there, patient and watchful, like a guardian angel in leather and denim. Nia picked up the small photo of her family back home and tucked it safely between her clothes. The frame was cracked from one of the employer's son's violent outbursts, but the smiling faces behind the glass remained unchanged. She zipped up the bag and took one last look around the room that had been both her shelter and her prison. As she walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoed against the marble floors. The grand house felt emptier than usual, its expensive decorations suddenly meaningless. She had cleaned these halls countless times, but now each step carried her closer to freedom. The front door was just ahead, when a sharp voice cut through the silence. Where do you think you're going? The employer's son stood at the bottom of the main staircase, his face twisted with anger. Behind him, his mother wrung her hands nervously. I'm leaving, Nia said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. I quit. You can't just leave, he snarled, taking a step toward her. You signed a contract. We own your visa. You have nowhere to go. Nia's grip tightened on her bag. Fear crept up her spine, but she thought of Jack waiting outside, and it gave her strength. No one owns me, she said quietly. The sound of heavy boots on the front porch made everyone turn. Jack stood in the doorway, his weathered face set in stone. He didn't say a word, but his presence filled the room. This is private property, the employer's son spat. Get out before I call the police. Jack took 2 slow steps forward. Go ahead, he said, his voice low and calm. Call them. I'm sure they'd be real interested in hearing about what's been happening in this house. He turned to Nia. You ready? The employer's son moved suddenly, reaching for Nia's arm. But Jack was faster. In one fluid motion he stepped between them, his large frame blocking the younger man's path. Touch her, Jack growled, and it'll be the last thing you do. The threat hung in the air like thunder before a storm. The employer's son backed away, his face pale with rage and fear. He's right about one thing, Jack said to Nia, never taking his eyes off the younger man. You did sign a contract, but contracts don't cover abuse, and they sure as hell don't make you anyone's property. Nia walked past them, her head held high. As she stepped outside, the morning air felt different, fresher somehow. Behind her, she heard Jack's final warning to her former employers. Stay away from her. If I hear you've tried to contact her or cause her any trouble, you'll answer to me. And trust me, you don't want that. She reached Jack's motorcycle, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and elation. The life she had known was over. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in months, she felt something close to hope. Jack emerged from the house, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. He gave her a small nod, and in that simple gesture, Nia saw all the support and understanding she needed. She was taking her first step toward freedom, and though the path ahead was unclear, she wasn't walking it alone. The small house wasn't much, but to Nia it felt like a palace of possibilities. Sunlight streamed through worn curtains, casting warm patches on the faded carpet. She stood in the living room, her single suitcase at her feet, taking in the modest surroundings: a weathered leather armchair, a simple wooden coffee table, and walls decorated with old motorcycle photos. "It ain't fancy," Jack said, scratching his gray beard, "but it's quiet and safe." He shuffled towards the kitchen, his boots making hollow sounds on the wooden floor. "Your room's down the hall, first door on the right. Used to be my office, but I cleared it out." Nia's fingers trembled as she picked up her suitcase. The weight of what she'd done, leaving her job, her accommodation, everything familiar, pressed heavy on her shoulders. But there was something else, too, something light and unfamiliar. Freedom. The bedroom was small but clean, with a single bed covered in fresh sheets. A wooden dresser stood against one wall, and a small window overlooked Jack's well-kept garden. "You did all this for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Weren't nothing," Jack mumbled, looking away. "Just figured you needed a proper place to sleep." Nia sat on the bed, running her hand over the cool cotton sheets. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. In her old room at her employer's house, she'd slept on a thin mattress in a converted closet. This felt like luxury. Jack cleared his throat. "There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. I usually eat around 6, but you can help yourself whenever." He paused at the doorway. "And Nia? This is your home now. You can come and go as you please." Those words hit her like a wave. Your home. The concept seemed foreign, almost dangerous to believe. But as she unpacked her few belongings, placing them carefully in the dresser drawers, something inside her began to unfold, like a flower reaching for the sun. Later that evening, they sat at Jack's small kitchen table, sharing a simple meal of spaghetti and meatballs. Jack wasn't much for conversation, but his presence felt solid, dependable. For the first time in years, Nia felt safe enough to let her guard down. "I never thought—" she started, then stopped, searching for words. "I never thought someone would help me like this." Jack just nodded, continuing to eat. But his eyes, usually hard and distant, had softened. The peaceful moment shattered when Nia's phone buzzed. Her hands shook as she looked at the screen, her former employer's number. The room suddenly felt cold, and her stomach twisted into knots. "Hello?" she answered, her voice small. Jack watched her intently as she listened to the voice on the other end. Her former employer's words were honey-sweet, promising better conditions, more money, a real bedroom. "We miss you," the woman said. "My son, he's very sorry. He'll never touch you again." Nia's throat tightened. The offer was tempting, not because she wanted to go back, but because guilt gnawed at her. They had brought her to America, given her a job. Didn't she owe them something? "No," she finally said, her voice shaking but firm. "I can't come back." She ended the call before her resolve could crumble. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she set the phone down. Jack didn't say anything, just pushed a box of tissues across the table. The gesture, small but meaningful, made her cry harder. She felt torn between relief and guilt, freedom and obligation, the past and the future. The morning sun streamed through the cafe windows as Nia arranged pastries in the display case. Her hands moved carefully, placing each treat just so, taking pride in making everything look Perfect. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe freely. "You're doing great with those displays," Sarah, her new manager, said with a warm smile. "The customers really notice the extra care you take." Nia's chest swelled with pride. It was such a simple thing, arranging pastries, but here she was being praised instead of criticized. The cafe job wasn't fancy, but it felt honest and good. The morning rush kept her busy. She learned the rhythm of taking orders, making change, and greeting customers with a smile that grew more genuine each day. Her co-workers were kind, showing her little tricks to make the work easier. No one yelled when she made mistakes. No one threatened her when the register came up short by a few cents. Around mid-morning, the cafe doors chimed as another customer walked in. Nia looked up with her practiced smile, but it froze on her face. There, standing at the counter, was Mrs. Chen, her former employer's sister-in-law. "Well, well," Mrs. Chen said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "If it isn't the ungrateful girl who abandoned my poor brother's family." Nia's hands began to shake. The cafe seemed to shrink around her, the walls closing in like they used to in that big house where she'd felt so trapped. Her throat went dry. I can take your order," she managed to say, trying to keep her voice steady. Mrs. Chen leaned forward, speaking low enough that only Nia could hear. "You think you're better than us now, working in this little cafe? My nephew is still very angry about how you left. Very angry indeed." The words hit Nia like physical blows. She could feel her old fears rising up, threatening to drown her. Her hands trembled as she gripped the counter for support. "Is everything okay here?" Sarah appeared beside Nia, her presence solid and reassuring. Mrs. Chen straightened up, her face shifting into a pleasant mask. "Oh, just catching up? With an old friend? I'll take a vanilla latte, please." Nia made the drink on autopilot, her movements mechanical. When Mrs. Chen finally left, Nia felt drained, as if all her newfound confidence had leaked away. That evening, she sat with Jack on his worn front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The words tumbled out of her. All about Mrs. Chen's visit, the threats barely hidden in sweet words, the old fear that had come rushing back. "I felt so small again," Nia admitted, wrapping her arms around herself. "Like all the progress I've made just disappeared." Jack shifted in his chair, his weathered face serious but kind. "Listen here, kid. You know what I see? I see someone who stood her ground. The old Nia would have run and hidden. Today's Nia stayed right where she belonged." "But I was scared," she whispered. "Being brave isn't about not being scared," Jack said, his voice gruff but gentle. "It's about being scared and standing tall anyway. That's exactly what you did today." Nia looked down at her hands, surprised to find they weren't shaking anymore. "I didn't run," she said slowly, realization dawning in her voice. "No, you didn't," Jack agreed. "You're moving forward, kid. Those old fears, they're just echoes now. They can't hurt you unless you let them." Jack sat at his kitchen table, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Morning sunlight streamed through the window, casting shadows across his lined face. Across from him, Nia stirred her tea nervously, her spoon clinking against the ceramic. "You need to take legal action," Jack said, his voice firm but gentle. "What he did to you wasn't just wrong, it was criminal." Nia's hands trembled slightly. "I don't know, Jack. The courts, the police." She shook her head. "In my experience, they don't always help people like me." "Times are changing," Jack replied, leaning forward. "I know good lawyers who handle cases like yours, people who care about justice. not just money. He pulled out a business card from his leather vest pocket, sliding it across the table. Nia picked up the card, running her thumb over the embossed letters. What if they don't believe me? They'll believe you, Jack said. You've got proof. Photos of your injuries, text messages, witnesses from the support group who saw your bruises. His voice softened. And you've got me. I saw what happened. Nia took a deep breath, remembering the constant fear, the pain, the humiliation. It's not just about me, is it? She said quietly. If he did this to me, he might do it to someone else, Jack finished. That's why we gotta stop him now. After a long moment, Nia straightened her shoulders. Okay, she said, I'll do it, for myself and for others who might come after me. Jack smiled, a rare sight that transformed his stern face. That's the fighter I knew was in there. They spent the morning gathering evidence, photographs, medical records, and written accounts of the abuse. Nia's hands shook as she wrote her statement, but her writing was clear and determined. Later that afternoon, as they were preparing to leave for the lawyer's office, Nia's phone buzzed. Her face paled as she read the message. What is it? Jack asked, concern etching his features. My old employer, Nia said, her voice barely above a whisper. They found out somehow. They're telling people I stole from them. She scrolled through more messages. They're contacting my new workplace at the cafe. They're saying I'm dangerous, unstable. Jack's jaw clenched. Typical. They're trying to scare you into dropping the lawsuit. Tears welled in Nia's eyes. What if my boss at the cafe believes them? What if no one hires me again? The phone buzzed again, making her jump. They're saying they'll report me to immigration. Jack placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Listen to me, Nia. This is exactly why we need to fight back. They're bullies. And bullies only understand one thing, standing up to them. Nia slumped in her chair, the weight of it all pressing down on her. Maybe I should just drop it, go back to my country, start over. Is that what you really want? Jack asked quietly. Nia looked up at him, seeing the concern in his eyes, remembering how he'd been there for her when no one else was. She thought about other women who might face the same abuse, the same threats, the same fear. No, she said finally, wiping her eyes. No, I won't run. I won't let them win. Jack nodded, pride evident in his expression. Then let's go see that lawyer. Whatever happens, you're not facing this alone. Nia stood up, gathering her documents with trembling but determined hands. Despite the fear churning in her stomach, she felt stronger knowing Jack was by her side. Together they walked toward his motorcycle, ready to take the next step in their fight for justice. The rumble of motorcycles filled the quiet suburban street. Jack stood on his front porch, his weathered hands gripping the railing as 5 Harley-Davidsons pulled up to his house. The familiar sight of leather jackets adorned with patches brought a flood of memories rushing back. Well, look who it is, a gruff voice called out. The ghost himself. Tommy, his old road captain, dismounted his bike with the easy grace of someone who'd spent more time on 2 wheels than 2 feet. Jack's jaw tightened. He hadn't seen his old crew in years, not since he'd walked away from the club. What brings you boys around? The bikers gathered at the bottom of his steps, their presence commanding and intimidating. Tommy, now sporting more gray in his beard than black, stepped forward. We've been hearing things, Jack, about you going soft, playing guardian angel to some girl. Inside the house, Jack knew Nia was listening. He'd told her about his past with the angels, but seeing it face to face was different. Club's not the same without you. Another biker, Razor, chimed in. We're expanding territory, making moves. Could use someone with your experience. Jack felt the pull of nostalgia, remembering the brotherhood, the freedom of the open road, the power that came with wearing those colors. His fingers unconsciously traced the faded tattoo on his forearm. "Think about it," Tommy said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a worn leather vest, Jack's old colors. "Your spot's still open. No questions asked about where you've been." Jack took the vest, its familiar weight heavy in his hands. The leather was soft, worn smooth by years of use. The patches, though faded, still carried the same authority they always had. "World's changing, Jack," Tommy continued. "Old guard's dying out. We need men like you, men who remember what it means to be a real angel." Through the window, Jack caught a glimpse of Naya watching from inside, concern etched on her face. He thought about their morning conversations over coffee, about the trust she'd placed in him, about the small steps toward healing they'd achieved together. "Remember Mexico?" Razor laughed, breaking into Jack's thoughts. "Man, those were the days. No rules, no limits, just us against the world." Jack's fingers tightened around the vest. Those days had been wild, free, and destructive. He remembered the violence, the drinking, the constant running from both the law and himself. "I've got responsibilities now," Jack said slowly, his voice rough. Tommy snorted. "Responsibilities? To what? Playing social worker to some immigrant girl? That ain't you, brother. Never was." Jack looked down at the vest in his hands, then back at his old friends. The temptation was real, to slip back into that life, to feel that rush of power again. But something had changed in him. "Maybe that's exactly who I am now," Jack said quietly. He held out the vest to Tommy. "I appreciate the offer, boys, but I can't." Tommy's face hardened. "You sure about this? Ain't no coming back if you turn. Us down now?" Jack nodded, thinking of Naya's courage in facing her own battles, of the strength he'd seen in her eyes at the support group meetings. "I'm sure. I've found something worth fighting for here." The bikers exchanged looks of disappointment and disgust. Tommy took the vest back, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd see the day Jack Stoneheart Williams turned soft." The small waiting room felt too quiet, making Naya's heart beat faster. She watched the clock on the wall tick away while her fingers twisted nervously in her lap. The gentle hum of a white noise machine couldn't mask her racing thoughts. "Nia?" A woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair appeared in the doorway. "I'm Dr. Martinez. Please come in." Nia stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. Jack had driven her to the appointment and waited outside in the parking lot. His presence, even from afar, gave her courage to step forward. The therapist's office was warm and inviting, with soft green walls and comfortable chairs. Potted plants dotted the windowsills, their leaves reaching toward the sunlight. Dr. Martinez gestured to a plush armchair, and Nia sank into it, trying to steady her breathing. "Jack tells me you've been through quite a lot," Dr. Martinez said softly. "We can take this at your own pace." Nia nodded, her throat tight. "I don't know where to start." "Start anywhere you feel comfortable. There's no right or wrong way to do this." The words tumbled out slowly at first, like water from a rusted tap. Nia spoke about the abuse at her former employer's house, her voice barely above a whisper. But as Dr. Martinez listened without judgment, something shifted inside her. "It wasn't just the hitting," Nia found herself saying. "It was the way they made me feel, like I wasn't human, like I deserved it." Dr. Martinez leaned forward slightly. "And when did you first start feeling that way?" The question hit Naya like a physical blow. Memories flooded back, not just from her time as a maid, but from years before. She remembered her childhood in Africa, watching her mother endure similar treatment from her father. The pattern was so clear now it took her breath away. I've been accepting this treatment my whole life, Nia whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. I watched my mother. She never fought back. I thought that's just how life was for women like us. Dr. Martinez handed her a tissue. That's a powerful realization, Nia. Recognition is the first step toward healing. The session continued, each revelation building on the last. By the end, Nia felt emotionally drained, but somehow lighter, as if she'd set down a heavy burden she didn't know she'd been carrying. Jack was waiting in his truck when she emerged from the building. The afternoon sun caught the chrome of his motorcycle, parked next to the truck. He'd chosen to drive the truck today, knowing she might need the comfort of an enclosed space after the session. "You okay, kid?" he asked as she climbed in. Nia took a deep breath, looking at her hands. They were steady now. "I understand more now," she said quietly, "about why I stayed so long, why I was so afraid to leave." She turned to face Jack. "I've been running from shadows my whole life, shadows that started long before I came to America." Jack nodded, his weathered face softening. "Facing those shadows takes guts." "I'm not just my mother's daughter," Nia said, her voice growing stronger. "I don't have to accept abuse just because she did. I can break this cycle." Jack started the engine, a proud smile crossing his face. "That's right. You're writing your own story now." "Thank you," Nia said, "for helping me find my voice." They drove home in comfortable silence, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of hope. Nia sat at Jack's kitchen table, spreading out papers across the wooden surface. Her hands trembled slightly as she sorted through photographs of her bruises, medical records, and work documents. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the scattered evidence of her painful past. Jack stood behind her, his weathered hands resting on the back of an empty chair. "Take your time, kid. We need to get this right." Nia nodded, picking up a crumpled pay stub. "Some weeks they didn't even pay me half of what they promised." Her voice was stronger now, different from the whisper it had been when Jack first met her. "That's good evidence," Jack said, pulling out his reading glasses. "Shows a pattern of abuse, not just the physical kind." He sat down beside her, carefully organizing the papers into neat piles. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as they worked. Nia's documentation was more thorough than either of them had realized. She had kept everything: text messages, emails, even recordings of threatening conversations she'd managed to capture on her phone. "Smart thinking," Jack said, examining the dates on the recordings. "The lawyers gonna love this?" Nia managed a small smile. "I was always afraid, but something told me to keep everything." She paused, touching a photograph that showed a dark bruise on her cheek. "I never thought I'd be brave enough to use it." Jack's face hardened as he looked at the photo. "That's not brave, Nia. That's survival. Brave is what you're doing now." A knock at the door made them both freeze. Jack stood up quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Stay here," he said, moving toward the entrance. Through the window, Nia could see a sleek black car parked in the driveway. Her heart pounded as she recognized it, her former employer's son's vehicle. Jack opened the door partway, blocking the entrance with his body. "What do you want?" "I need to speak with Nia." The voice was smooth, practiced, so different from the angry tones she remembered. "It's important." Nia stood up, her legs shaking but her voice steady. "It's okay, Jack. I can handle this." Jack stepped aside, reluctantly, his eyes never leaving the well-dressed man who entered. The employer's son held a leather briefcase, his expensive suit a stark contrast to Jack's worn jeans and t-shirt. "Naya," he said, setting the briefcase on the table. "I think we can resolve this situation without involving the courts." He opened the case, revealing neat stacks of cash. $50,000, tax-free. Just sign this agreement stating you won't pursue any legal action. The room fell silent. Naya stared at the money, more than she'd ever seen in one place. It represented freedom, security, a chance to start over. But as she looked at it, she felt something else rising in her chest. Anger. "No," she said quietly, then louder. "No, this isn't about money." "Be reasonable," he said, his smooth facade cracking slightly. "This could solve all your problems." Nia straightened her shoulders, meeting his eyes directly. "My problem started with you thinking you could buy the right to hurt people. I won't let you buy your way out of this too." Jack moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring behind her. "Take your money and leave," Naya said firmly. "I'll see you in court." The man's face darkened, but Jack took a step forward, and he quickly gathered his briefcase. "You're making a mistake," he said, backing towards the door. "No," Nia replied, her voice unwavering. "For the first time, I'm not." The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the church basement as Nia sat in the familiar circle of metal folding chairs. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap, and she could feel Jack's steady presence beside her. The support group's usual faces looked back at her with encouraging smiles. Sarah, the group facilitator, spoke gently. "Nia has something she'd like to share with us today." Nia took a deep breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. The words she'd practiced in front of her mirror for days felt stuck in her throat. Jack's weathered hand found hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Take your time," he whispered, his voice gruff but kind. Nia nodded and slowly stood up, her legs shaky beneath her. "My name is Nia," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And She paused, clearing her throat. "I am a survivor." The room remained silent, patient, allowing her words to find their way out. Nia's fingers twisted the hem of her sweater as she continued. 3 months ago, I was trapped, working as a maid, enduring—" Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "Enduring abuse that made me feel worthless. I thought I deserved it. I thought I had no choice." She glanced at Jack, drawing strength from his presence. "Then someone asked me a simple question. Who battered your face?" Just 5 words, but they changed everything. The group members leaned forward, captivated by her story. Naya's voice grew stronger with each word. "I was so scared to leave, to speak up. But now I know that staying silent only protects the abusers. It lets them keep hurting people." Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "I'm taking legal action against my abuser. I'm learning to trust again. I'm healing." A woman in the front row wiped her eyes with a tissue. Another nodded vigorously, understanding written across her face. "But the most important thing I've learned," Naya continued, "is that we're not alone. Each of you has shown me that, and maybe by sharing my story, I can help someone else know they're not alone either." As Nia finished speaking, the room remained quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, a young woman named Maria stood up. "I've never told anyone this before," Maria said, her voice shaking. "But I'm going through something similar at work. I've been too afraid to speak up. But hearing your story..." She dabbed at her eyes. "If you can do it, maybe I can too." Another woman stood up, then another. Soon, the room filled with voices sharing their own stories of abuse, fear, and the desire to break free. Stories that had been buried for years finally found their way to the surface. Jack watched from his chair, his eyes glistening with pride as Nia listened to each person, offering words of encouragement and understanding. The tough exterior he usually wore softened as he witnessed the impact of her courage. Sarah had to call for order as more hands raised, more voices eager to speak. "I think we've witnessed something powerful today," she said, smiling warmly at Nia. "Sometimes it just takes one person's bravery to help others find their own." Nia sat back down, overwhelmed by the response. Her chest felt lighter, as if sharing her story had lifted a weight she didn't know she'd been carrying. Looking around the room at the faces of people finding their voices, some for the first time, she understood that her pain hadn't been meaningless. It had become a bridge for others to cross toward their own healing. Nia sat at Jack's kitchen table, surrounded by scattered papers and a worn notebook. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote down her business plan. "Clean Slate Services" was written at the top of the page in neat letters. "You're doing the right thing," Jack said, placing a steaming mug of coffee in front of her. His weathered face carried a proud smile. "I hope so," Nia replied, her voice soft but determined. "I keep thinking about all the women out there, trapped like I was." She looked down at her carefully crafted flyers, designed to reach women in abusive situations. The next morning, Nia stood outside a women's shelter, her cleaning supplies neatly packed in her car, a recent purchase she'd made with her savings. Her heart pounded as she approached the shelter's director, Maria. "We have several women who could use work experience," Maria said, reviewing Nia's proposal. "But are you sure you can handle training them?" Nia straightened her shoulders. "I was them, just a few months ago. I know what they need. Not just a job, but someone who understands." Her first employee was Sarah, a quiet woman with downcast eyes that reminded Nia of herself. As they cleaned their first client's house together, Nia noticed Sarah's hesitant movements. "Take your time," Nia assured her. "Remember, you're in control here." She demonstrated the proper way to clean windows, making sure Sarah felt comfortable with each task. The challenges came quickly. Some clients canceled when they learned about her hiring practices. Others questioned her prices. One afternoon, after losing a potential contract, Nia returned to Jack's house, feeling defeated. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this," she mumbled, slumping onto the couch. Jack shook his head. "Remember what you told me about giving up? Those women need you, Nia. You're not just running a cleaning service. You're offering them hope." As weeks passed, Nia's business slowly grew. She hired 3 more women from the shelter, each with their own story of survival. During lunch breaks, they shared their experiences, their fears, and their dreams. One day, while training Rachel, her newest employee, Nia noticed the woman's hands shaking as she organized cleaning supplies. "I never thought I'd be working again," Rachel admitted, wiping away tears. "My ex, he always said I was worthless." Nia placed a gentle hand on Rachel's shoulder. "I know that feeling. But look at you now. You're proving him wrong every single day." The moment struck Nia deeply. She saw in Rachel's grateful eyes the same spark of hope she'd felt when Jack first offered to help her. Now she was doing the same for others, creating a circle of support that grew stronger with each woman she employed. During their monthly team meeting, Nia looked around at her small but dedicated crew. Sarah was confidently training a new hire, while Rachel organized their expanding client list. The women who had started as frightened employees were blossoming into confident professionals. "We're not just cleaning houses," Nia announced to her team. "We're cleaning away the past and making room for new beginnings." As she drove home that evening, Nia felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the setting sun. Her business wasn't just surviving, it was transforming lives. Each woman she hired was another step toward healing, not just for them, but for herself as well. She pulled into Jack's driveway, feeling a deep sense of pride in what she had built, one cleaning job at a time. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Naya's small office space, where she sat reviewing applications from potential clients. Her cleaning business, Fresh Start Cleaning Services, had been operating for 3 weeks now, and already she'd hired 2 other women who'd escaped similar situations to her own. A shadow fell across her desk. Naya looked up, her heart stopping when she saw Thomas, her former employer's son, standing in the doorway. His expensive suit and perfectly styled hair couldn't hide the darkness in his eyes. "So this is what you've been up to," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. He stepped inside without invitation, closing the door behind him. "Playing entrepreneur with Daddy's money?" Nia's hands trembled, but she kept her voice steady. "I built this myself. Please leave. You're not welcome here." Thomas laughed, a harsh sound that made her flinch. "You think you can just start a business in my father's neighborhood? Who do you think owns half these buildings?" He leaned forward, placing both hands on her desk. "One phone call and your lease is terminated." Nia's throat went dry. She hadn't considered that the family's influence might extend this far, but she thought of the women she'd hired, women who finally had hope for a better future. "You can't intimidate me anymore," she said, though her voice wavered. "Really?" Thomas's smile widened. "Because you look pretty intimidated to me, just like old times, right?" The door burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall. Jack filled the doorway, his weathered face hard with anger. "Step away from her desk," he growled. Thomas straightened, trying to hide his surprise. "This is a private conversation." "Not anymore, it's not." Jack moved into the room, positioning himself between Thomas and Naya. "You're going to walk out that door and never come back." "Or what?" Thomas sneered, but Naya could see the fear in his eyes. "You'll assault me? Go ahead. I'll have you arrested so fast." "No assault needed," Jack said calmly. He pulled out his phone. "Just gonna make a call to Channel 7 News. They've been real interested in stories about wealthy families abusing their domestic workers. Wonder how your daddy's business partners would feel about that." Thomas's face paled. "You're bluffing." "Try me." Jack's finger hovered over his phone. "I got proof. Pictures of Nia's bruises, medical records, witness statements. One call and your family's reputation is done." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Finally, Thomas backed away from the desk. "This isn't over," he muttered, but his threat sounded hollow. "Actually, it is," Jack said, "because if you ever come near Naya or this business again, I won't just call the news. I'll call every contact I've got from my old life, and trust me, son, you don't want that." Thomas fled the office, nearly tripping over his own feet. As soon as he was gone, Naya's composure crumbled. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Jack's gentle hand on her shoulder made her look up. "You okay, kid?" Nia nodded, wiping her eyes. I thought I was strong enough to handle him on my own." "Being strong doesn't mean handling everything alone," Jack said softly. "It means knowing when to let others help you fight." Looking at Jack's concerned face, Naya felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it brought fresh tears to her eyes. She wasn't that scared maid anymore, trapped and alone. She had someone in her corner, someone who would stand up for her when she needed it most. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The morning sun streamed through the windows of Naya's small office, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. She sat at her desk, reviewing applications from women seeking work with her cleaning service. Each form told a story of struggle and survival that touched her heart deeply. This one, Nia said softly, holding up a paper. She reminds me of myself. She looked across the desk at Maria, her first hire, who now helped her manage the growing business. Maria nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. The way she describes her situation, it's like reading your story all over again. Nia's phone buzzed. It was Jack. The hearing's tomorrow, he reminded her. You ready? As ready as I'll ever be, Nia replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. Over the past few months, her cleaning service had grown from a one-woman operation to employing 5 other survivors of abuse. Each success story gave her more strength for the battle ahead. Later that afternoon, Nia led a training session for 2 new hires. As she demonstrated proper cleaning techniques, she couldn't help but remember her days working in fear at her former employer's house. But now, instead of feeling trapped, she felt empowered. Remember, she told the women, this isn't just about cleaning. It's about building a new life. We support each other here. The next morning, Nia stood outside the courthouse, her hands trembling slightly. Jack appeared beside her, his weathered face set with determination. You've got this, kid, he said, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. Inside the courtroom, Nia's former employer's son sat with his expensive lawyers, looking smaller than she remembered. As she took the stand, her voice shook at first, but grew stronger with each word as she recounted the months of abuse she'd endured. The evidence was overwhelming. Pictures of her bruises, medical records, witness testimonies from other household staff. The defense tried to paint her as an opportunist, but her truth shone through. When the judge announced his decision, Nia felt tears streaming down her face. Her former abuser was found guilty on all counts. The judge's words rang out clearly. 6 months in jail, mandatory counseling, and a restraining order. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by the women from her business and support group, Nia felt lightweight, as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted. Jack stood at the edge of the group, trying to hide his proud smile behind his gruff exterior. We did it, Nia whispered, still in disbelief. You did it, Jack corrected her. I just gave you a push in the right direction. Back at her office that evening, Nia sat at her desk, looking at the framed business license on the wall. Clean Slate Services read the certificate, a name she'd chosen carefully. The phone rang with another potential client, and as Nia answered, she felt the familiar surge of purpose that came with helping others find their way to freedom. On her desk lay several more applications from women seeking work, each one representing another chance at transformation. The legal victory wasn't just for her, it was for all of them. As she began reviewing the next application, Nia felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had turned her pain into purpose, her trauma into triumph. The rumble of motorcycles filled the quiet suburban street as Jack stood on his front porch, watching a group of familiar faces approach. His weathered hands gripped the porch railing, knuckles white with tension. The annual Vietnam Veterans Reunion had snuck up on him this year, bringing with it faces from both his military days and his time with the Hells Angels. Jackie boy, called out a gruff voice. Mike, the snake. Anderson, his old riding buddy, dismounted his Harley with the ease of someone half his age. Behind him, 3 other riders parked their bikes, their leather vests adorned with patches that brought back a flood of memories. Jack's throat tightened. These men had been his brothers once, both in war and on the streets. They'd shared blood, pain, and a brotherhood that had helped them survive the darkness that followed them home from Vietnam. Been a while, Jack managed, descending the porch steps. The men embraced him with rough hugs and heavy slaps on the back. Too long, Snake said, his eyes scanning Jack's simple clothes and the peaceful neighborhood around them. "You've gone soft on us, brother. Remember when we used to own these streets?" Inside the house, Jack could hear Naya moving around in the kitchen, probably preparing dinner. The contrast between his past and present life had never felt more stark. "Things change," Jack replied, his voice low and measured. Snake pulled out a familiar patch from his vest pocket. Jack's old colors. "The chapter misses you, man. We're planning something big, just like the old days. Could use someone with your experience." The weight of the patch in Jack's hands felt both familiar and foreign. He ran his thumb over the worn fabric, remembering the power and freedom it once represented. But now, it felt more like chains than wings. "Come on," another writer, Tommy, chimed in. "You can't tell me you're happy playing house with that girl? That ain't the Jack we know." Jack's jaw clenched at the mention of Naya. He thought about her journey, her strength, how she'd faced her demons head-on. He thought about the light she'd brought into his life, replacing the darkness that had consumed him for so long. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of Nia setting the table, humming softly to herself. She'd come so far from the frightened woman he'd first met in that yard. She'd taught him more about courage than any battle ever had. "The Jack you knew," he said slowly, looking each man in the eye, "was running from something. Running from the war, from the pain, from himself." He handed the patch back to Snake. "I'm not running anymore." Snake's face hardened. "So that's it? You're choosing this domestic life over your brother's?" "I'm choosing peace," Jack said firmly. "I'm choosing to help people heal instead of causing more pain. That's my redemption, Snake, and I won't turn my back on it." The tension hung thick in the air. For a moment, Jack thought Snake might throw a punch. It wouldn't have been the first time. But instead, something like understanding flickered across the older biker's face. "You really have changed," Snake said quietly. "We all can," Jack replied. "The door's always open if any of you want to find a different way." The bikers mounted their motorcycles one by one. As their engines roared to life, Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He watched them disappear down the street, taking with them the last remnants of his old life. Inside, Naya was waiting by the kitchen door. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. Jack looked at her, seeing all the possibility and hope she represented. "Yeah," he said. "Everything's exactly how it should be." Nia stood in front of her bathroom mirror, touching the fading marks on her face. The bruises had long since healed, but sometimes she still expected to see them there. This morning was different, though. She smiled at her reflection, noticing how her eyes sparkled with newfound confidence. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as she prepared breakfast. The simple act of making her own meal in her own space filled her with quiet joy. No more tiptoeing around, no more holding her breath, waiting for the next outburst. The kitchen timer dinged, and she didn't flinch, a small victory she cherished. "Something smells good," Jack called from the living room, where he was reading his morning paper. His gruff voice had become a comfort rather than a source of fear. "Just trying that banana bread recipe Sarah from the support group shared," Nia replied, pulling the golden brown loaf from the oven. Her hands were steady now, no longer shaking when she handled hot pans. As she set the bread on the cooling rack, the doorbell rang. Nia's heart skipped a beat, not from fear but from shock. There, through the peephole, she saw familiar faces she hadn't seen in years, her mother, father, and younger sister. "Mama?" she whispered, throwing open the door. Her mother's arms were already open wide, pulling her into an embrace that smelled of home and childhood memories. "My strong girl," her mother murmured into her hair. We've been so worried." Her father stood tall, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Her sister bounced on her toes, unable to contain her excitement. They had all flown in from Ghana, having saved for months after learning about everything Naya had been through and overcome. Jack appeared in the hallway, and Nia's father stepped forward, extending his hand. "You must be Jack. We've heard so much about you and Naya's letters." "Sir." Jack nodded, accepting the handshake. His usual gruff exterior softened as he watched Nia reunite with her family. They gathered in the living room, where Nia's mother couldn't stop touching her daughter's face, her hands, as if making sure she was real and whole. Her sister chattered excitedly about how proud everyone back home was of Nia's new business. "When you first left for America," her father said, his voice thick with emotion, "we thought we were sending you to a better life. Then when we learned what happened—" He paused, collecting himself. "But look at you now. You've built something beautiful from something terrible." Nia's mother pulled out a small package wrapped in colorful African fabric. Inside was a hand-carved wooden pendant, a traditional symbol of strength. "Your grandmother wore this during her hardest times," her mother explained, fastening it around Nia's neck. "She always said that strength isn't about never falling, but about rising every time you fall." Nia touched the pendant, feeling its smooth surface under her fingers. Looking around the room, at Jack, who had become like a second father, at her family, who had crossed an ocean to show their support, at the photos on the wall of the women she'd helped through her business, she felt something settle deep in her soul. This was what safety felt like. This was what love felt like. This was what it meant to be truly free. Her sister grabbed her hand, squeezing it tight. "Tell us everything," she said. "Tell us about your business, about helping other women. We want to hear it all." The morning sun streamed through the windows of Nia's small office, casting a warm glow on the faces of 3 women seated before her. They were new hires, each with stories that echoed her own past struggles. Their eyes held that familiar mix of hope and uncertainty she knew all too well. "Remember," Nia said, her voice gentle but firm, "this isn't just about cleaning houses. It's about rebuilding lives." She handed each woman a freshly printed employee handbook, remembering how far she'd come from those dark days at her former employer's house. The office, though modest, represented everything she'd fought for. Photos of smiling clients lined the walls, and a small plaque from the local women's shelter honored her community service. In the corner, a motorcycle helmet rested on a shelf, Jack's gift when she'd earned her business license. "Ms. Naya," one of the women spoke up, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm scared I'll mess up. What if I'm not good enough?" Nia's heart squeezed with recognition. How many times had she asked herself the same question? "Sarah," she said, moving to sit closer to the nervous woman. "I used to think that too, but you know what? Making mistakes doesn't make us failures. It makes us human." The words felt different coming from her mouth now. For months, she'd been telling others to be kind to themselves, to forgive their past choices. Yet she'd struggled to extend the same grace to herself. The weight of her own perceived failures, staying too long in an abusive situation, doubting her worth, almost giving up, had clung to her like a shadow. Later that afternoon, Jack stopped by with lunch, as he often did. He found Nia sorting through job applications at her desk. "Looks like business is booming," he said, setting down a paper bag that smelled of fresh sandwiches. "It is," Nia smiled, then paused. "You know, Jack, I had the strangest feeling today. For the first time, when I was talking to the new hires about moving forward, I actually believed it myself." Jack settled into the chair across from her desk, his weathered face softening. That's called healing, kid. I think... Nia took a deep breath. I think I'm finally starting to forgive myself. For everything. Even the things I thought I could never let go of. The realization had crept up on her gradually, like dawn breaking, after a long night. Each time she helped another woman escape abuse, each time she shared her story at support groups, the grip of shame and self-blame loosened a little more. You know what this means? Jack asked, gesturing around the office. You found your calling. All that pain you went through, you're turning it into something beautiful. Nia looked around at her growing business. The filing cabinets were full of success stories. Women who'd started as clients and become employees. Employees who'd gone on to start their own ventures. On her desk sat a stack of speaking invitations from domestic violence prevention programs. I used to think healing meant forgetting, she said softly. But it's not about forgetting at all. It's about remembering who you are despite what happened to you. The afternoon light caught the tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. For the first time, she felt truly at peace with her past. The memories were still there, but they no longer had power over her. Instead, they had become stepping stones, leading her to exactly where she needed to be. She picked up another job application, reading the desperate words of someone seeking a fresh start. Every time I read one of these, she said, I remember that day you asked me about my bruises, how one question changed everything. One question, Jack nodded, and look at all the answers you found. Jack sat on his front porch, the morning sun warming his weathered face. His motorcycle gleamed in the driveway, freshly polished but used less frequently these days. He took a slow sip of coffee, watching the neighborhood come to life. The past year had changed everything. Before Naya, his days had been a blur of loneliness and regret. He'd spent decades running from his memories of Vietnam, seeking refuge in the chaos of the Hells Angels. But that simple question he'd asked about her bruised face had set them both on an unexpected path. Morning, Jack, Mrs. Peterson, from across the street waved as she walked her dog. Jack raised his coffee mug in response, something that would have been unthinkable months ago. Back then, neighbors crossed the street to avoid him. Now they stopped to chat, asked about Naya's cleaning service, and treated him like a valued member of the community. He heard Nia's voice from inside the house, talking on the phone with one of her employees. Her business had grown from a one-woman operation to a small team of survivors, each with their own story of escape and renewal. Pride swelled in his chest, not the fierce defensive pride of his biker days, but something warmer and more genuine. Jack? Nia appeared at the screen door, her face bright with excitement. Remember that veterans group you mentioned? The one that helps with job training? He nodded, setting down his coffee. Yeah, what about them? Well, I was thinking... She stepped onto the porch, clutching her phone. Maybe we could partner with them, offer cleaning services to elderly vets, maybe create some jobs for their families too? Jack's eyes widened. He hadn't thought about his old connections that way before. His mind raced through his list of contacts, not just the veterans group, but other organizations he'd encountered during his own recovery journey. You might be onto something there, kid. He stood up, energy coursing through him. I know at least 3 different groups that could use your services. Plus, there's that women's shelter downtown. Over the next hour, they sat together on the porch, making calls and taking notes. Jack watched as Nia's eyes lit up with each new possibility. She'd come so far from the frightened young woman he'd first met, transforming into a confident business owner who helped others find their strength. By mid-morning, they had 5 new contracts lined up. Nia's cleaning service would now provide work for women from the shelter, veterans' families, and others seeking a fresh start. Jack's old connections, once symbols of his troubled past, were becoming building blocks for something positive. "I never thought I'd be doing this," Jack admitted, looking at their growing list of clients. "Back in the day, if someone had told me I'd be helping run a cleaning business." He chuckled and shook his head. Nia squeezed his hand. "You're doing more than that, Jack. You're helping build a family." Those words hit him hard. He looked around at what his life had become. The tidy house that now served as Nia's business office, the driveway where her employees parked their cars each morning, the garden they'd planted together. The constant rumble of motorcycles had been replaced by the sounds of women laughing, sharing stories, and supporting each other. He watched as one of Nia's new employees arrived, a former shelter resident who now had her own apartment and was saving for college. She waved to Jack, calling him Papa Jack, like all the others did now. His heart felt full in a way that no amount of wild living had ever achieved. This was what redemption felt like. Not a dramatic moment of change, but a quiet transformation built on small acts of kindness and trust. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the freshly painted walls of Nia's new office building. The scent of coffee and fresh pastries filled the air as women gathered in small groups, their chatter and laughter creating a warm symphony of joy and hope. Nia stood in the center of the main room, her eyes bright with unshed tears as she took in the scene before her. The space wasn't huge, just a modest two-story building on the edge of town, but to her, it represented everything she'd fought for. Clean slate services. Read the elegant sign above the reception desk, with the tagline, "A fresh start for every woman." "I can't believe how far you've come," Jack said, appearing at her side. His leather vest was worn but clean, and he'd traded his usual scowl for a proud smile. "Look at all these people here to support you." Indeed, the room was filled with familiar faces. Sarah, one of the first women Nia had helped escape an abusive situation, now worked as her office manager. Maria, who'd been trapped in a violent marriage, handled the company's finances. Each woman had her own story of survival, and each one now stood tall, their heads held high. "We did this together," Nia replied, squeezing Jack's arm. "I wouldn't be here without you." The celebration was in full swing when a hush fell over the crowd. Through the front door walked Thomas Morrison, Nia's former employer, flanked by two lawyers. His son, the one who had caused Nia so much pain, wasn't present, having been sentenced to jail time for his actions. Mr. Morrison looked smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched with the weight of public shame. He approached Nia, and Jack instinctively moved closer to her side. "Ms. Nia," Mr. Morrison began, his voice trembling slightly, "I've come to make a public apology." He cleared his throat, facing not just Nia, but the entire room. "What happened to you in my home was inexcusable. I failed to protect you. I failed to listen when you needed help. I failed to act when I should have known something was wrong." The room remained silent as he continued. "I can never undo the harm that was done to you, but I want you to know that your courage in speaking up has forced our family to face some hard truths. My son is getting the help he needs, and He paused, swallowing hard. "I am making donations to several organizations that help domestic abuse survivors." Nia stood straight, her dignity evident in every inch of her posture. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Your words mean a lot, but your actions mean more. I hope you'll continue to support survivors in meaningful ways." After Morrison left, the celebration took on an even more jubilant tone. Women approached Nia one by one, sharing stories of how she'd helped them find their strength, their voice, their freedom. Each story touched her heart, filling her with a profound sense of purpose. Looking around the room, Nia saw more than just survivors. She saw warriors, women who had faced their darkest fears and emerged stronger. She saw Sarah teaching a new hire how to use the scheduling system, Maria explaining financial independence to a group of interested listeners, and Jack in the corner, quietly ensuring everyone felt safe and protected. Her heart swelled with emotion as she witnessed the ripple effect of her journey. What had started with a gruff biker asking about her bruised face had transformed into a movement of hope and healing. Each woman in this room was proof that pain could be turned into purpose, that trauma could be transformed into triumph. This wasn't just an office. It was a sanctuary of second chances, a place where broken spirits could be mended and new dreams could take flight. The evening sky painted streaks of orange and purple across the horizon as Nia and Jack sat on his front porch. The wooden swing creaked gently beneath them, a rhythm as steady as their friendship had become. The air was cool, carrying the sweet scent of blooming jasmine from the garden Nia had planted months ago. Nia wrapped her hands around a steaming mug of tea, letting its warmth seep into her fingers. She watched as the last rays of sunlight caught the silver in Jack's beard, making it shimmer like threads of starlight. His weathered face seemed softer in the fading light, the usual hard lines around his eyes smoothed by contentment. "Remember that first day?" Nia asked, her voice quiet but clear. "When you asked about my face?" Jack nodded, his hands resting on his knees. "Couldn't forget it if I tried. You looked like a scared bird, ready to fly away at the slightest movement." "I was terrified," Nia admitted, taking a sip of her tea. "But something in your eyes. I saw kindness there, even though you tried to hide it behind that tough biker facade." Jack let out a low chuckle, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. "Tough biker facade, huh? Guess it wasn't as convincing as I thought." The swing creaked again as Nia shifted, tucking her legs beneath her. The golden light caught the healing scar on her forearm, a reminder of her past that was fading more each day. "You know what made me trust you? It wasn't just that you asked about my bruises. It was that you stayed. You kept showing up day after day." "Couldn't just walk away," Jack said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Seen too much of that in my life. Vietnam, the Angels, people always walking away when things get tough." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree in the yard. In the distance, a car horn honked, and children's laughter floated over from the park down the street. These everyday sounds, once background noise to Nia's fear, now represented the peaceful life she'd built. "The women at the shelter," Nia said, "they're starting to trust me. Now. Really trust me. Yesterday Maria told me she's ready to leave her husband." Pride filled her voice. She said seeing me build my business gave her hope. Jack's eyes crinkled at the corners. "You've given a lot of people hope, kid, more than you know." Silence settled between them, comfortable and warm like an old blanket. The sun dipped lower, painting the clouds in deep shades of pink and gold. A mockingbird sang its evening song from somewhere nearby. Nia reached over and squeezed Jack's hand. His skin was rough, marked with old scars and the story of his life, but his grip was gentle. "You know, when I first came to America, I thought I'd find my dream here. Instead, I found a nightmare." She paused, watching the last sliver of sun disappear behind the horizon. "But now, looking back, maybe I did find my dream. Just not the way I expected." Jack squeezed her hand back, and his face softened into that rare smile that transformed his entire appearance. "I guess we both found our redemption, didn't we?" Nia's eyes welled with tears, but they were tears of joy and gratitude. She smiled back at him, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, and we'll help others find theirs too." They embraced, the tough old biker and the brave young woman, their unlikely friendship a testament to the healing power of compassion and courage. The first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky above them, witnesses to their shared moment of peace. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.